next meeting, what do you have, what do you just can't vote? Is that the only?
I don't know
can
if we
vote
pass
no.
this policy Okay, I'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. Would all who wish join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We have two agenda adjustments to add an item 8D, which would be board approval of a new position, namely an Ed Tech 2 for nursing assistant funded by ESSER, and to add an item 8AI1, which would be a hire, so OHS Social Studies teacher hire. So I would make a motion to add those two items to the agenda. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any further agenda adjustments or questions? We'll go ahead and vote. We're still technically a remote meeting, so we'll do roll call. And we have so many new members, I have to think what the what the order is. I think I called Aaron first, so I'll call Beth first.
Yes.
Jake.
Aye.
Patrick.
Aye.
Mark.
Aye.
I also vote aye, so the agenda is adjusted. This is not something we need to take action on, but just noticing we have a new board member, Beth Huffnagel, appointed by the town council. So welcome aboard. And the thing we probably do need to take action on is committee assignments. So Aaron had Wellness Committee and UTC. And so, I don't know if you're open to just stepping into those, or if somebody's not liking their committee assignments, I guess this is an opportunity to rejuggle those too. I'm seeing Beth nod her head.
Yep.
Yes.
As long as I can make those meetings. I think I talked to you about my Thursday constraints.
Yes.
So yes, those are fine.
Okay. And we do need to vote for, especially for the UTC, because since we're delegating to somebody to go vote at the broader Benquist level. So I would make a motion to appoint Beth Huffnagel as the RSU 26 representative to the UTC and as the new chair of the Wellness Committee for RSU 26. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? We'll go ahead and vote. You're first, Beth. You can abstain if you want.
Do I have to abstain?
You don't have to.
Okay. Aye.
Okay, great. Jake.
Aye.
Patrick.
Aye.
Mark. I also vote aye. So welcome aboard. The minutes are not ready for consideration, so we'll skip those. Next up are the warrants. I would make a motion to approve payroll warrants 26 and 1, regular warrants 26, 26A, 26B, and 1, bond warrants 40 and 41, and main purse for June. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? We'll go ahead and vote. Beth?
Aye.
Jake?
Aye.
Patrick?
Aye.
Mark?
Aye.
I also vote aye. Okay, next up is public comment. I don't know how many people are here to make public comment. We're open, obviously, to everybody who wants to make public comment. I don't think I'm going to set a time limit at this point, but please do keep in mind that we have multiple things on the agenda, and try not to be repeating things other people say, or, if you're thinking 2 or 3 minutes for your comments, that's probably the right kind of time frame to be thinking. So the floor is open for public comment. Would anybody like to make a public comment? Sam, I see you first. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Sam Hess. I'm the father of 2 kids who are going to be going to Asa Adams. Is it okay for me to comment on the recommendations for going back to school, or is this restricted to other things at this point?
No, this is an open floor. Typically,
Okay.
It's anything coming in the meeting, but honestly, anything you want to comment on,
I
as
would
long as
just-
it's not calling out individual employees by name.
Oh, thank you. I would just like to advocate for requiring masks for everyone at ASA this fall. It worked really well last year. We had COVID cases going around in the community, and since our kids are not yet vaccinated, there's some risk of transmission from adults who are unvaccinated or vaccinated through breakthrough cases, especially when masks are not being used. It's clear that the schools are doing everything they can to try to keep our kids safe, and I would like that to continue. And I feel this would be a fairly low cost way to ensure that our kids can get through without any chance of long-term disability or other health problems. It seems to me like not too much to ask, and it would really help improve the safety for our kids. So I would just ask that that be considered. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Jose, it looks like you were trying to speak. Go ahead if you were.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. I know that the American Academy of Pediatrics just came out, pediatricians just came out with their recommendation on Monday. Their recommendation is anybody 2 and older should be wearing masks at school. And this was specifically the recommendation for getting back to school full-time in person at fall 21 is everybody should be wearing a mask indoors. The other piece to that is that, you know, as Sam was saying, the ASA population specifically, there's not a vaccine available for them. But in terms of middle school and high school, those people that are 12 and older, only about 47% across the entire state have gotten a vaccination. I know that we were asked to turn in vaccination cards to Karen Martin a little while back, maybe a couple months or a month or so before school ended. But I haven't heard back in terms of any feedback with regards to how many kids across the entire school system are vaccinated. I know that there's some HIPAA stuff around that, but I think a very large or rather a high level understanding of 50, 60, 70% of the school district or even just each individual school, we can get a better idea of what's going on. So I think like Sam said, I mean, just putting on a mask it doesn't seem like that big of an ask. And it's more proactive than it is preventative. I saw that different coding levels that we might say, if we hit orange, we're going to require those that are unvaccinated to wear masks. If we hit red, then everybody's required. But, you know, kind of until we get there, we're not really going to require anything. As far as I know, I don't think we're doing anything in terms of accountability for those or to make sure that people that are unvaccinated do wear a mask. So I think in the absence of some of these other things, it probably makes more sense to have broader masking policies so that we can be more proactive than preventative. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment?
Hey, Brian.
Hey, Leo, go ahead.
Yeah, just following up. I sent the board email and Meredith an email. I appreciate the committee balance at the level of perceived risk in the Orono community, which is obviously varied. My big concern is that I think this draft does discriminate against our youngest learners, the PK to 5, that we absolutely know are not sick with COVID and are not disease, as well as any student have You're
breaking up pretty badly, Leo. I don't know if there's anything you can do.
Oh, am I?
Yeah, we're having trouble understanding.
Hold on a second, would you? Hold on one second.
Yep, go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
That seems to be better.
Hello?
Yep.
I don't know what's going on here. How's that? Can you hear me?
I think so. It
Yes.
seems better.
What I guess I think again, personal decision always has that option. Create this caste system of this one group and is really going to be often student and parents' attitude towards the other class is going to be. I think math should be a Is that it?
Yeah, Leo, are you done? Sounds like it. Okay. We got the gist of that at least. Any other public comment? Brian,
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to share my view. So I think I can speak. I'm going to speak for myself. I have some medical conditions that really make me concerned about COVID, and I think that the idea of having children who can't yet get vaccinated be in a situation where they are working with people who might choose to be not vaccinated and are only recommended to wear a mask is, for me, a very dangerous situation, and makes the choice of whether or not to send my child to school an easy one, right? I can't risk my life. And I know there are a number of people in our community that feel this way, that have these same kinds of conditions that don't allow them the opportunity to maybe not worry so much about getting sick. And I think that putting this on the backs of our children, and I'm sure there are children in the same situation, but not having the opportunity for these children to be in a safe environment. And we know that masks are great and helpful, but they aren't 100%. So even unvaccinated people wearing masks can still obviously spread the disease or the virus. So I would really urge the board to consider the strongest public health options we can, so that this public school can be really enjoyed by the community at large. Those of us who have particular conditions and those of us who are perfectly healthy. I think it's a public school, and really need to make sure that we're allowing all the kids to participate that we reasonably can. Thank you very much for letting me share that.
thank you. Any other public comment? Give it one more chance. Anybody want a last shot?
I just want to clarify for everyone that, so everyone's aware that comments in the chat are not part of the official record of the meeting. So if you wish to have something entered into the official record of the meeting, you should offer that verbally.
Any other public comment?
Hi.
Hi.
I was using the chat because I just didn't want to spend time repeating what other people have said, but I appreciate the comments and I agree wholeheartedly. We also have vulnerable family members, and it would be really hard to have to make the choice between sending my kids to school and putting them at risk that way. So yeah, I really hope that the school decides to kind of tighten up the guidelines as much as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Last chance until the end of the meeting. There's another public comment period, but last chance for now. Okay, seeing none, we'll go ahead and move forward. So next up, we have acknowledgements. I won't start with you, Beth, since you're new to these, but Jake, anything? And I don't know, it's a summer meeting. We don't need to dive deep into acknowledgements.
No, that's fine. I was just going to acknowledge the summer school staff who's been working hard this month to provide programming for students, and also the staff that's doing the additional more social related programming that occurs in the afternoon. Thank you to them for doing that.
Patrick, anything you want to add?
Not today. I mean, everything Jake says is fantastic.
Mark?
I guess I would like to acknowledge the staff and community members who volunteered their time, even though it's summer, to serve on search committees. We've had quite a few going, so thanks to all the people who are putting the effort in on those.
I think I agree with everything that's been said. Might have been covered. Anything you want to add, Beth?
No, but just to repeat what both Mark and Jake said.
Meredith, anything you want to add?
I would just acknowledge all the staff working this summer. In addition to what Jake acknowledged, it's just a very active campus this summer, lots happening, and it certainly doesn't feel typical. So everything with our cleaning staff is just extra complicated this summer with all the construction we have going on. So acknowledge all those individuals working really hard this summer to get schools ready for fall.
Great, thanks. And next up, we have Superintendent Report.
I interject. I
Please.
know you said the minutes weren't ready, but did we skip over the warrants?
No, we did them. I remember reading them, but I'm pretty sure we voted on them too.
All right, my bad.
Thanks. Well, I'd rather call it out than miss it.
That's why I crossed things off on my list.
All right, Superintendent's Report.
Sure, thank you. So to begin with, I want to announce a resignation / retirement that notice that we received since we've last met. I notified the board, but I just want to acknowledge publicly, Don Joseph resigned recently and submitted his retirement papers, and he has been with the district for 21 years of certainly great service, and we thank him for those years and his service as a teacher. And look forward to, he does plan to continue as a coach and perhaps in other roles. So we thank him for many years of service to the students of Baume High School. Also, just want to confirm that to the board that we did advertise for the 4th kindergarten teacher. I emailed the board since we've last met to ask you for permission to go ahead with that, and we have put the advertisement out. We're not at the point of being ready to interview yet. We're still waiting on kind of a critical mass of applications. As I said, when I emailed you, the numbers have steadily grown, and we see, as we learn more about these students, that we need that group to be in 4 classes. So, with that, along with a couple of other teaching positions that are still posted, I do expect that we'll need to schedule a special meeting sometime between now and our next regularly scheduled meeting, which is August 10th, to take some hires. We'll try to do those all as a group, try to get them all to the finish line and schedule one meeting for that. It's hard for me to predict tonight when that might be, but I'll try to get, we'll try to nail down the timeline in talking with the OHS admin and ASA admin to kind of think about when we might be ready to take all of those, to bring all of those to you for your consideration, and I'll follow up. I will say, how many weeks are in between now and the 10th? 2 weeks? It's shocking
3,
to
I
me
think.
that, are there 3? Okay, good. I'm glad there aren't just 2. So my hope is that we could do that before the end of the month, but just not sure. Depends on how applications flow. So that's all I really had in my report, unless you have questions on other items tonight.
Any other questions for the superintendent before we get into the agenda items? We'll go ahead and start on 7A, which is the COVID update and discussion. You all have seen circulated, and indeed at this point, all the parents and staff have seen circulated a draft plan that came out of a working committee that was appointed by the board. And there we go. I was hearing an echo. Thank you. Appointed by the board. And so appointed by the board, as well as the superintendent. It had representatives from all the schools. It had teachers, administrators, staff, parents, students, a board member. We tried, and several of whom, the school nurse, school doctor, and through several of those functions of teachers and board members, quite a few parents were represented as well. So they worked through this draft document. What you see is the consensus recommendation from that working group. The working groups report to the board, so it's coming forward to the board. Meredith and I talking about this, especially as this is not like, unlike last year where we were, saying, well, this is what we're going to do for the next 2 weeks or 4 weeks. I think there's some hope that we can put this plan in place and have it, I don't want to jinx us, but have some traction for some months. If nothing changes with COVID, maybe even it's something that could stay in place for the year, because it does have some adaptability built into it. So given that it's a pretty heavyweight, influential document, we thought it was important to kind of treat it like it's not a policy, but treat it like a policy where we have a first read opportunity for community input, and then come back for a vote by the board, probably at the August 10th meeting. And, with a full several weeks for the community to react and send us input. And I've already gotten, I don't know, 5 or 6 emails from community members, which I appreciate. Those are all noted too. To the extent you feel comfortable, I certainly encourage you to send those emails to all of the board members. You can find our addresses on the board section of the RSU 26 webpage. For that matter, our phone numbers are on there. An email to the whole board is honestly, and the superintendent is probably your most effective channel, but give us your feedback however you have it, and we will have another public comment period at the end of tonight and one again at the meeting before we take a vote. And so, and then the other thing I'll say is sometimes I know the board is deadlocked with people on both sides of a policy or a position. I really, I want to let the board feel like their opinions are expressed and on the record, but I also hope maybe at some point we can find a way to be a legislative body that holds our noses and finds a consensus and has something to move forward to. So I'll just plant that seed out there as well. I do think rather than kind of dumping this on the administration, it'd be nice for the board to actually pass this policy. It's not a policy, but this procedure for COVID. So with that as a background and a context, really tonight's just a comment period. We've heard from the community. And I think this is just a chance for the board to give some feedback. And then there's a 3-week period for more thinking. And then we'll bring something that is potentially final, probably on August 10th.
I'd like to add just a few things in setting the stage for our discussion as well. Brian mentioned where this document came from, but kind of backing up a little from that, just to kind of reflect on what our frame was for last summer and throughout last school year. We consistently used the state of Maine COVID health and safety framework. It was what all schools in Maine were expected to do. You had to sign agreeing you were following the core 6 requirements, and then there were recommendations. And there were certainly a lot of other options for what could be used beyond just some core requirements and recommendations, because, last summer the AAP had out different guidance that didn't align with that. And the federal CDC guidance was slightly different from that. So we hitched our wagon to the state guidance and stayed there for the year. And when the emergency, state of civil emergency ended June 30, the direction from the state was now we are directing all Maine schools to use the federal CDC guidance. We are no longer developing state guidance. Our schools should follow that guidance. So now we've shifted, and this document is based on the federal CDC guidance, which is what our state is directing us toward now. That guidance was updated. I think I mentioned in the email I sent out to the school community. That guidance was updated on July 9th in a very comprehensive way, and kind of, had the most recent elements around vaccination impact for school opening, and updating all of the research around things like cleaning and the effectiveness of cleaning on COVID prevention. So we use this updated guidance and actually framed our guidance as kind of a direct correlation to that guidance document, which also lays out these 9 safety precaution or prevention measures, I think they are called. And we have laid those 9 out and kind of indicated how we're tracking back to that guidance. And I think the whole trick for us really all along is, and the US CDC guidance is largely written as recommendation. And so under that, we have to decide for our context and our community and our schools, how we align with those recommendations. And really, even under the state guidance, there were some hard and fast requirements, but there was a lot of having to find our way under those as well. So that's really what we have to do right now. That's how we have to use this guidance. You can't, I don't think you can go to this guidance and say, well, there it is. We do A to Z just like it says, because I think that the way it's designed is really giving districts a set of guidance that you apply to your context. And so that's the way this document is presented. And the reopening committee, we brought a draft forward to them. We had great discussion. We adjusted some elements based on that discussion. And in the end, reached consensus around the document. It was kind of, though, what Brian indicated. Not everyone was able to say, yeah, everything in this is perfect. But I think everyone in that, most said, yes, this document's ready to go. And some said, I can live with it. And I think that's reflective of our school community, that all along there's been a large spectrum of perspectives and kind of, tolerance for risk and what they're looking for from their schools, and trying to strike the balance of being responsive to the whole school community and also responsive to the guidance under our context is the task that's before us. So I also received some feedback today. I think similar feedback. We were on some of the same emails and some other. And, it's reflective of our diverse school community, right? So the full gamut of feedback, but it was limited. I think I got six or so emails today. So I appreciate also the feedback tonight. And, I think that we will probably learn more in terms of CDC guidance before, August 10th comes. I would like to say that what's there is going to hold. Maybe it will, but chances are there'll be some adjustment, some tweak from that. So all along last year, we just had to be ready to respond to changing guidance, conditions along the way. And so this draft is presented with that caveat. So that's kind of some background that I wanted to add to what Brian said.
Yeah, that was really important. And last year, I think part of how we got through things, as a community, compromising and politically, but part of how we got through things healthy was we really adhered to the main CDC guidelines. And as Meredith said, it's not like they were black and white. There's a giant escape clause at the bottom about every district doing their own thing. And there were sometimes shades of gray within the advice. Maine's made it pretty clear they're not going to do that this coming year and has pointed to the US CDC. But I think it's really important that we try and identify an authority, because if we don't have some authority that we're tracking, we got this a little bit last year because the US CDC and the Maine CDC were not always in sync. And we kind of, in particular, the Maine CDC was being updated more often. So I personally felt more comfortable last year with the Maine CDC, but it's pretty clear the US CDC is going to be the kind of front line that's updating on a regular basis these days. And so, and by the original intention, they were, I think they kind of dumped that down on the states last year, but they're not doing that this year. So it seems to me like the right authority. And like Meredith said, I think it's a really important point. I think it's fair to say, if somebody wants to find a statement that contradicts me, go for it. But, and I mean that sincerely, but I think we're in full compliance with the US CDC guidelines in letter. Everything they say, you should do this, we're saying we will do this. Everything they say, we recommend this, or you should, one of the things they say, first thing they say really clearly is kids need schools, communities need schools, the schools have to open and get kids back in school. And then on top of that, schools should have a multifaceted strategy of responding for safety. And, and then they go through that, and we follow that exactly. But I just wanted to highlight, there's distancing strategy, there's masking strategy, and there's no doubt those are the two things that got us through last year. We are letting up, at least in the current guidelines, letting up the pedal on those a little bit, not a lot. They're not going away, but they're not quite as strong as last year. But I do want to point out that there's two other things. Ventilation was not really in the guidelines last year, but this district chose to really invest heavily in ventilation. And I personally, I think that the rest of the country has come around on that at this point. We are going to be doing 6 air changes of clean virus-free air an hour, 6 to 7 air changes an hour, plus a HEPA filter in every room for the entire year again. That's a really big safety mitigation measure that's going on. And the new thing in the guidelines anyway is this pooled testing. It's voluntary opt-in testing, but it gives us an early warning system about viruses in the school. And so that's a totally new safety measure that's going in, which is, like I said, very consistent with the CDC spirit. They're not kind of, you have to do one measure perfectly. It's much more about try and push on all of these fronts. And we are pushing on all of these fronts. And the distancing and more so the masks was the biggest area of conversation in the committee. So it's no surprise to me, it's the biggest area of conversation here. But I would just, I would point out that there is a nuanced, we're not, the only thing the CDC says we have to do is recommend masks for people who are unvaccinated. And we are not doing the other extreme that I heard tonight of requiring it for everybody in the buildings. But there are a lot of things in between that we are doing in terms of, escalating mask requirements as the caseload goes up, which I think personally is a really, really important feature. The risk is very strongly tied to caseload. Right now, in the Bangor area, I haven't seen an exact statistic, but there are only a few dozen people who are sick right now, and most of them are probably quarantined. So, the risk state right now is totally different than the risk state certainly in January, but even November or April last year. So I think tying masks to the risk level is a really important feature that's in there for masks. We're making distinctions between, grades where we know people can't be vaccinated and when they have an opportunity to be vaccinated. So I would just encourage, it's not at either extreme, but I would just encourage people to look at that carefully and see exactly what we are doing. There's quite a few. We're doing more than the CDC minimum for sure. And, so I think there's room for a nuanced conversation around that. So I'll stop there. I've had a lot of chance to have input on the committee and just like to open it up to the rest of the board.
I want to say one more thing, not
Yeah.
about this. Rachel is away this week and she normally puts all the documents on the website for all of our attendees. I'm just putting them in the chat because I don't know how to do that. So I'll put them in the chat as they come up on the agenda.
And this guidance has already been posted there. A couple of comments up. So again, we're not deciding tonight, just open it up and let people think out loud.
Recognizing that we probably don't have data that's very current, but what are the current rates of vaccination at, and this is where it gets a little tricky because we have students who've moved up, right? So the 5th graders are coming out into the middle school and so forth. So I don't even know how to ask the question about the different schools because it will be different than, right? I imagine we had at the end of the year, but I am curious about the vaccination rates amongst our students and the staff.
Yeah,
And if we have those parsed out, that would be helpful for me.
Yes, when Jose mentioned that, I made a note that I want to go back and see if that data has changed because the reporting really slowed down once we all left for summer. And we were talking at the meeting about doing another kind of effort to try to get some more reporting on that. So at last report, our student rate was around 36%, but that was a combined percentage. We didn't break down middle school, high school at that point. We could certainly go in and do that now, we just haven't. And so that was at the end of the school year. And one of the things we talked about in the meeting was number one, trying to, find ways to encourage people to submit that information if they have not already. But also we're in the process of scheduling another vaccination clinic on campus for in the next week or so to get started holding the first round. So I made a note to get that data and see if there's a change there. So I don't have updated data on students beyond that. The staff data is for last year's staff, and it hasn't changed really that much, is 89% for our school day staff, our permanent, teachers, support staff and admin and all who are here day in, day out. when you add in all on our sub list and all of our coaches and all of our co-curricular sponsors, it goes to, I think it's 86%, which is still quite good, but you know, those individuals are a little more itinerant. So really strong on the staff side, I would characterize, and the student side was still low at last report, but I felt like it largely those numbers were the ones that we had in our clinic that we knew about. There were other reported cases or vaccinations. I just felt like it probably wasn't everything, and Karen felt that to be true also. And she said she'd received information over the summer that she was still working on compiling. So.
I think the one question I have is, do we want to, this brings up the point that Leo is making, which I think in some ways, I agree with him in that, do we want to be treating people differently?
And Meredith, can you say any more about I'm sorry. No.
Sorry, Beth. So I guess the question I have is like, do we want to be treating people differently if they're vaccinated or unvaccinated? I'm okay with doing that. I think that part of the proposed recommendations is okay, but I also completely 100% see the other side where Leo's coming from, and where I think some of the other board members have spoken in the past is that, there's potential bullying issues, and do we really want to, out people's health status by saying, hey, this person's not vaccinated and they're wearing a mask. And so I think that, I would be in favor of adopting a set of standards for everyone, if that was something where people were concerned about, some kind of discrimination based on health status. My preference would just be that we would adopt a more conservative standard, basically saying, treat everyone as if they're unvaccinated, if we were going to do that. In terms of, thinking about looking at health status, the other thing that I thought was interesting that, those of you who are connected to the university community would have seen this, is that it looks like the university is saying, okay, we've got our protocols for people who are going to voluntarily submit their vaccination status. So if you want to voluntarily tell us that you're vaccinated, now you're exempt from our standard protocols of testing and mask wearing and all those things. And I think that would be maybe a way to frame this if you were going to have two sets of requirements, one for people who are vaccinated and one for people who are not vaccinated, is instead of phrasing it like that, you could say, hey, here is our standard protocol. But if you would like to voluntarily submit that you are fully vaccinated, then there are some exemptions based on the science of the fact that you're not vaccinated. But that would allow someone who maybe is vaccinated but didn't want people to know that to continue to wear a mask in school. And you wouldn't necessarily know if someone was wearing a mask, whether they were vaccinated or not. So I just thought that was an interesting approach, and I wouldn't mind seeing that incorporated if that's something that people are concerned about with privacy concerns and any sort of, outing of your health status with this. The one area where I am concerned is that if we do have adults who are school employees who are not vaccinated, who are not wearing a mask, I would be pretty opposed to that. And so I think, I don't know what the legal issues are with that. And I don't know what the issues are with any labor contracts we have in terms of requiring people to submit vaccination status or requiring people, to wear a mask if they're not vaccinated. So if that's fine legally, then I would say that I would like to see us not voluntarily, but require people to submit their vaccination status. And if they are not vaccinated, wear a mask, if we're not going to have a universal assumption that nobody's vaccinated in terms of how we treat health status. And I think that treating students and employees is a different thing, because as a parent, I would like to have a choice whether or not my child's teacher has been vaccinated. Like, honestly, I don't want my child to be in a classroom with someone who's had the opportunity to be vaccinated and has chosen not to. Religious and health exemptions apply here, certainly, but if it's just someone who's chosen not to be vaccinated, I don't want my child in that classroom. And And I certainly don't want my child in that classroom if the adult's not wearing a mask. So I think I wouldn't be the only parent in our community who feels that way. And I think that that's something we have to consider seriously as the board, as employers. What's our responsibility to the kids, and what are our obligations as employers to protect the kids who we're taking care of? So I think those are my main points. I'm certainly willing to be as flexible as possible, but I think that unvaccinated adults who are employees not wearing masks, to me, is a line that I would want to draw.
To add to what Patrick had to say a little bit, and I guess what Leo had to say, my biggest concern with the document is around the mask end of it, specifically this, what I think is, in my opinion, discrimination of one group of students over another. As I think about it, the first time that we go, assuming we go orange at some point this year, the first time we do that, I think it's going to create a poor educational and social environment. And what I mean by that is, I think the first time we go orange and, a certain subset of students and a certain subset of staff are wearing masks, I think that students are going to start treating students differently. Students will start treating staff differently. Staff may even start treating students differently. They know who's vaccinated and who's not, and who I get close to and who I don't. Staff is going to start treating staff differently. Patrick, as you just alluded to, parents are going to start treating staff differently. I mean, the first time that happens and your kid comes home and says, hey, my teacher, didn't have a mask on, or, you're right. We may get a situation where we have parental requests for their child to be moved to a different class, especially in the elementary level where they're in the same class for most of the day. And then you're also going to have parents treating students differently. There's already stories out in this community about parents not letting unvaccinated students play with their students and stories like that. So, I would be in, I do agree with what Brian said about tying the use of masks to the level of COVID around us. I just object to allowing one group of students and staff to do something that the others not, and the negative consequences that'll have. I'll say, as I read through the document, there's 21 topics in it. I actually agreed with 19 of the 21 topics. This mask topic was one that I took exception with. To add to it a little further, the other exception I took with the masks is, I'm glad to see that the 6th through 12th grade aren't required to wear masks anymore. But I feel bad for our pre-K through 5 population, because in my opinion, and I realize it's just my opinion, it's not everybody's opinion, and I respect others' opinions, but in my opinion, the social emotional toll on these kids from wearing masks all year outweighs their risk, at least in their age group, of COVID. And then the only other exception I took with the guidance, which was a fairly minor exception, which I think I need some more questions on, is around the pool testing. I know we discussed this in the spring. We discussed testing anywhere from 1 to 3 times a week. I don't know what we'd be doing. I don't think we discussed the financial cost with the tests. But more importantly to me, the biggest issue with the pool testing is I'm concerned with the educational disruption associated with the test, especially if we're doing it 3 times a week, and especially at the elementary level. I understand, I went to, Meredith, you had given me their website back in the spring, and I went to it, and it sounds like the test itself is fairly short as far as them coming into the classroom and doing that. But I think that any elementary teacher would tell us that after the tester is gone, it's not like the students are right back on task. There's another level of educational loss for them to get refocused and start doing that. And then the only other thing I wanted to say about the pool testing is I agree with, and I strongly agree with, it has to be opt-in. Opt-in only. I know there was some talk on this board about making it mandatory. I'm glad to see that it's opt-in. And other than that, those are kind of my thoughts on it.
Can I just clarify a few things about pool testing? So pool testing is, the program is designed to be once a week testing. And if there is a positive result in the pool, maybe, Jake, that's when it becomes, you have to do retesting once. And then again, if you don't have a positive result yet, a second time. So typically it's just once a week that pool testing is happening. And they indicated with younger students, it's going to take about 10 minutes to do the pool. With older minutes, probably 3 to 5 minutes. Older students, 3 to 5 minutes.
Is that per student or per
No,
classroom?
per pool, per
Okay.
class. So that's the kind of broad time parameters. The state is paying for all the testing. They're doing it through relief money. We would need, and it's part of what's on here, we would need to hire another nurse assistant, another ed tech to help run this program. And I'm suggesting that we pay for that with our ESSER 3 funds. And so that's the cost to us monetarily. And then of course it is time, and, but, I guess I'll say one other thing about pool testing. I have vacillated about pool testing since, it was first introduced. And to me at this point, it's an important extra layer to add in if we have loosening of other precautions like masking and distancing. It's that extra layer of monitoring because you're trying to, find COVID before it becomes symptomatic and then excludes a whole classroom or a whole school like we had last year at the middle and high school at times. So if someone's participating in pool testing and they're in a pool where there's a positive result, and they test negative in the follow-up quick response test that Nurse Martin or one of our nurse assistants would do, they do not have to quarantine as long as they're doing the pool testing and follow-up testing. So it actually eliminates the need for quarantine rather than increasing the need for quarantine for those who are either in the pool or willing to do the follow-up testing if you're in the class with someone who's in the pool who was positive, if that makes sense. So, the idea is that if you can identify COVID before it's symptomatic, then you avoid the transmission. And so if you can find where that positive case is by doing the quick response tests, and then that person, if they are positive, begins their isolation, hopefully that starts before others have been affected by transmission. So that's how it works in a nutshell.
So I know the general guidance is that if you're vaccinated, you don't have to, for example, quarantine if you're a close contact with somebody who's been infected. Do we know how that interacts with the state guidelines on the testing? If somebody's demonstrated to us voluntarily that they're vaccinated, are they not required to be? They could still choose to take part in the testing because it's, there's breakthrough cases and it's opt-in. But if somebody is or isn't taking part in the testing and somebody in the classroom shows up as positive, are people who are vaccinated exempted?
If someone's in the class and there's a positive case, I know that it says if they submit to the Binax rapid test that they do not have to quarantine. I will have to go back and look in these FAQs I printed to see if they don't want to do the Binax now testing, but they're vaccinated, if they have to quarantine. That question I don't have in my head, so I'll look at that.
Yeah, down in the weeds, but thanks. Yeah. Mark, you want to weigh in?
Sure. I'm generally supportive of the bulk of what the committee has come forward with. I guess one quibble that I do have, I don't think it's a major one, seems to me that it's assumed, but I would like an explicit statement put in there that says no masks are required outdoors at any time. So I'd like to see that added in the final version that comes to us in 3 weeks. I guess My one area where I've been doing a lot of thinking is the same area that everybody else has been focused on. And it sounds like from what Brian said was the big area of discussion within the committee, and that's on the question of masks. I certainly get Jake's concerns, and from what I've heard and know about Leo's thoughts on this, they're Leo's concerns, and Patrick shares them to a certain extent as well, about possibly setting up a situation where students or faculty or staff who are unmasked or masked, could go either way, are treated differently from those who either are or aren't masked. And those are real legitimate concerns, and I think we need to take them into consideration. That being said, I also am relatively strongly opposed to requiring individuals who are fully vaccinated and are willing to document that they are fully vaccinated from wearing masks at the current rate of transmission that we have in Penobscot County. I think that one of the big incentives for people to get vaccinated, quite frankly, is allowing them to do things that people who aren't vaccinated can't do. And if it were my call, I would have went much further in that direction as a national policy. There are some places in Europe that are doing that far more than we are here. That's not anything we can do broadly here, but for that reason, I mean, if we went to red, I might see things differently, but under the current scenario, I can't imagine supporting a policy where we required fully vaccinated individuals to wear a mask. So I would, in an ideal world, everybody could get vaccinated and would get vaccinated, in my opinion. And again, that's just my opinion. I know some people would disagree with that. The world's not ideal, and the big concern is that right now we have a big chunk of our population who is unable to get vaccines, right? Hopefully that best case scenario, I've heard, maybe September, early October. Let's hope that happens. Might be more realistic that we're looking at November to January. But anyway, I do think that we need to take the steps to keep those individuals safe. But at the same time, people who are fully vaccinated and are willing to document it, I'm not supportive of having those wear masks. So I'm not willing to go as far at this point as to say, if you don't mandatorily report or voluntarily report, that you have to wear a mask, but I'm also not taking it off the table. So I guess the one thing I am certain of is that under current situations, I would not be supportive of asking fully vaccinated individuals to wear a mask. If they want to, they can, but of requiring that, I wouldn't go there. Everything else, for the most part, looks, I'm fine with that.
I had a couple comments, but you may have gotten cut off. Did you want to speak more?
Yes, thanks. So first, since this is my first meeting, I do want to thank the committee for doing all of this work. And I have no doubt it was difficult at times, just like these conversations, can be difficult at times too. This is very complex. I overall feel these are, a strong set of guidelines, similar to my fellow members, questions around the masking too for myself, as well as what many of the community members have shared tonight. So a couple of things that I kind of want to mention, is that there are people in our community that can't get vaccinated for medical reasons. We have, I imagine, students that way, maybe staff, but certainly community members. There are medical reasons why people can't get vaccinated. And so the purpose of vaccination, right, is to protect the people who can't get vaccinated, as well as protecting the people who can. I have wondered as I read this, I have a child who's going into middle school, and she just turned 11. So at this point, right, she could be going to school where most of her friends or peers are not wearing masks. And, middle school and high school, I was a high school teacher, these are spaces of implicit and explicit, pressure, social pressures. So I think there's an important piece around thinking about masking with that. I tend to be more of a mask, type of person err on the side of caution. That's not what everybody else is, and I recognize that. But when I think about the sixth graders and middle schoolers, but this does extend to the rest of the middle and high school, is that we, you know, if we do have vaccination rates, even at like 50%, you know, questions for me of, you know, how are we going to enforce who's wearing a mask and who's not, is really kind of undergirding all of this. And I think that's what's so hard about this. So I wonder if at these meetings with the group, was there any sense of linking vaccination rates in the schools to masking requirements? Because you know, what I wonder is for the, you know, if the students are old enough to decide themselves or their parents, like what's the motivation to be vaccinated with this set of guidelines? Because I'm not kind of seeing that. And that gives me pause as someone who's concerned about our overall community health. So I was wondering if there were questions around, or if that came up in the committee at all, and or how that was discussed, recognizing, you know, I don't have an answer tonight about that, but that is something that I have wondered about.
I don't recall that came up much in the conversation, but obviously it's an option. You know, if we hit 60%, 70%, 50%, I don't know what the number is, but if we hit some number, we could take masks off, and until then masks are all on, you know. I bet there's 5 opinions in this room on that, but it's obviously an option. I don't think it was discussed much though. Do you remember?
Well, I think the first part of it was, which was how tricky it is to have a requirement for only vaccinated individuals among students. With staff. First of all, sharing that information with the whole staff seems, I'm just uncertain about sharing that kind of medical information with all staff members about their students. We typically don't do that. I do have a call into the attorney to ask some questions about some of this, because that was a big part of our discussion of, can we compel people to report vaccination status? There's been a lot of hesitancy about that when I'm talking in superintendent groups based on, you know, a feeling that people have from what they've heard. But Brian and I talked and we decided, let's just ask and see what we're told by our council. So that's really what we focused on most. It's an intriguing question to say, if we could have some kind of, you know, kind of setting enforcement aside, I'm intrigued by the idea that requiring, like the university model, I forget who shared it, but I've read about it and we've all read about it. And, you know, I think that does encourage vaccinations, but the tricky part of that, I wonder, how is the university enforcing that? Are they giving some kind of card? Can you, you know, are certain people going to be charged with asking people to show their card? Do you have to?
Right.
So how are other people doing that? Do you know if the university has an enforcement model?
They have an app that you're supposed to put on your phone that's supposed to be managing this whole process, but that doesn't necessarily mean it gets translated into on the ground enforcement. And I don't know if as a district, especially with younger kids, whether requiring an app is a particularly viable option either.
Well, that's why I was wondering if it's, you know, a set percentage of the population. And I don't know if it would be by school, you know, or the entire, you know, student recognizing ASA is different, but I also feel the middle school is different from the high school. It's, you know, but let's just say, for example, the middle school, you know, if, I don't know, we, you know, kind of, we linked the masking requirement to a percentage, like, hey, once we get to, I don't know, 70, 80% vaccination, you know, we can safely feel like masks, you know, anybody who wants to take their mask off can. There might be kids, and I think, you know, Jake, you mentioned this idea of like, and I know other people did too, you know, the mask signifies our vaccination status, but really it doesn't. I mean, I wear a mask in stores still. And I know I don't have to in Maine, but I do, and I'm fully vaccinated, because to me, the mask doesn't completely overlap with the vaccination. And so I think too, there's a lot more nuance to whether or not someone's wearing a mask and what that may or may not convey about their vaccination status. But I do wonder, I do get concerned that we might not have like a strong sense of community to be like, hey, listen, not everybody can get vaccinated. So what are we going to do as a community to help keep as many people safe as possible? And as long as you're medically, able and it aligns with your, religious beliefs, like, please get vaccinated. And look, once we get to this, I mean, that's what was put forward by the president. And we've seen, things now are a little bit more stagnant nationwide, but there was a big impetus. And so I wonder, I know this wouldn't fully address your questions, Mark, and your concerns, because, right, like there would still be people waiting, right? But at the end of the day, to me, like, I would think we would want to help everybody be back in person in ways that don't have to require masks. And if people still want to wear them because they're uncomfortable and or because they can't be vaccinated, and maybe there's a piece too around just educating everybody to remind them that it's not binary. It's not like if you're wearing a mask, you're anti-vax or something. It's way more nuanced than that. But I do wonder if that's possible, because I just get concerned that we're going to have to keep track of who's vaccinated and who's not. And this way, everybody just submits. Teachers don't need to know. Peers don't need to know. And we have, a sense, hopefully a strong sense of community saying, hey, we're looking out for each other. And this is what we do to look out for each other. And then ASA, being a little different because nobody's eligible, obviously, that's going to be hard. And I just saw Deb White's comment too, right, about the OMS students under age 12. Yeah, I mean, I think, but I'm interested in talking about this, even if it's not right now, because not everybody's eligible, but, as we move forward, because to me, that's what matters most. And that's what's going to keep people the safest, even if they still have breakout cases, right? Hopefully it won't be hospitalizations.
Hey, Meredith, when you said you had to talk to council about some questions, have we talked to them about, the discrimination aspect of having certain students wear masks and others not, and if that potentially opens us up to a parent who presents a suit, if that happens? Have we had that discussion with Drone and Whitson?
We haven't. I haven't heard that concern until, the email this afternoon and tonight, because we, I guess, I'm not sure what angle you're asking it, because in our plan, it treats everyone in a school the same. So.
Until it does, but until we reach orange, then it treats them differently.
Right.
Based on their vaccination status.
Right.
And Beth, did you mention you were a middle school and a high school teacher? Yeah, so my biggest concern with this, and how mean those kids can be, and I agree with you when it comes to adults, we don't care who's wearing masks and who's not, and we don't treat people differently because of that. But kids, unfortunately, as you've seen, they do, and that can be a cruel environment for kids, and it seems anti-Orno to do that to kids, in my opinion.
I guess what I'm proposing would actually address that, though, because it would keep everybody masked until we reach a certain percentage. And then you only wear a mask if you want to, because we've technically hit herd immunity in the school.
Beth, I really like that idea, but I think that one of the things that we need to.
Patrick's.
Oh gosh, I'm sorry, Patrick. I keep cutting the.
Yeah, I'm still here. Part of the reason why I've been attending meetings remotely is that for me, I work all day, 6 inches, 12 inches from someone's mouth, and they're not wearing a mask. But when I'm doing that, I'm fully gowned and I'm wearing an N95 and I've got goggles and a face shield, and I'm following all the current CDC recommendations for dental care, which are still the same as they were 6 months ago, essentially. and like Beth, I still wear a mask when I'm out in an indoor space out in public, because if I was a breakthrough case, I'd be out of work for 2 weeks while I was quarantining. And that's not something, for me, wearing a mask is an easy way to add a layer of protection to make sure I don't miss out on work or impact my patients that way. But one of the things I just wanted to point out about this kind of like when we reach a benchmark approach, and I really love that idea, but I think it's going to be tricky. It wasn't in his last meeting, but sometime in the last month and a half of when they were doing the weekly briefings with Director Shaw, I remember there was a question where someone said, what would you consider the safe place for herd immunity to be? And, this is paraphrasing and it's from memory, and so this number would have to be verified. But I remember him saying, well, I used to say it was around 70%. And this was before the Delta variant kind of took hold in other regions of the country. He said, but now with the new variants, and at the time it was mostly the Beta or the British variant, I'd say that's probably closer to 90%. And so to reach herd immunity, if we're talking about, I know Iota is the variant that's dominant in Maine as of the report that came out July 9th. And that always lags behind what's actually going on. But if we look at the increased transmissibility of COVID-19 compared to where we were last school year, we're in a much more transmissible place right now. And so if we set herd immunity as our standard, we have to be constantly adjusting that to, okay, what variants are circulating? And, when do we get to that benchmark based on what variants are circulating? And right now things, look great. We are in that kind of yellow zone for the CDC guide, but we're just barely over it from blue. But, if things tick up and it is a more transmissible variant, I think reaching an actual herd immunity as opposed to one that just kind of feels good would be a real challenge. But something to consider, if it's possible to get to 90% immunized and then no one has to wear a mask, I'd be on board with that. I hear all the concerns about making vaccinated people wear a mask, but I also, completely agree with what Jake's saying about how cruel kids and honestly, even adults can be to each other. My 80-year-old father was recently screamed at in a parking lot outside the grocery store for wearing a mask. So it's not just kids.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. Couple things I wanted to just add. Let's see. So one voice I haven't heard tonight, and I'm not saying this in an argumentative fashion of what we should do about policy, but I see some sincere sounding questions about why not just mask. The voices that I've heard that have affected me the most, Jake and Leo and Mark have all made their own expressions for the general population, but we do have a student population that has special needs, and some of those special needs are specifically focused around social difficulties. And masks really downgrade the ability of these kids to navigate the world. They're not, the feedback doesn't come in as easily as it does for other people. And all of a sudden we've just cut out 2/3 of the feedback that these kids are used to receiving. And I've heard several parents speak, not obviously I didn't show up tonight, but at some other meetings, I've heard parents of these kids speaking quite eloquently about how really masks are. And, and the tough thing is you can say, well, they can just wear a shield or, we can make an exemption for them on masks, but really it's everybody else that they're interacting with that it matters. So I'm not saying that in an argumentative fashion. I totally hear I have a medical condition and I'm really being cautious too. But I just think it's important to recognize there's pressing, physical, not just preference, but physical issues on both sides of masks. So just wanted to give, and I'm not saying that argumentative or, what that says we should do about policy, because I think both of those points are really valid, but I wanted to give that point some voice because I've heard it very eloquently at several board meetings, and I just wanted to have that expressed tonight too. Well, I think the only other thing I wanted to say is and this is not the CDC school guidelines that we're pairing ourselves up with, but the more fundamental CDC guideline for the nation about a mask if you're not vaccinated is excellent science, and it's terrible public policy because it's almost unimplementable. and now we're being put on, and so the consequence is now the schools are being, and the towns, but really especially the schools this year, are being put on the front lines of this unimplementable policy. If we were like some of the countries that Mark mentioned in Europe that are doing vaccine passports, it might be implementable because there'd be a national buy-in to this notion of tracking things. But we're not. In this country, it is unimplementable. The way it's written, it's either going to end up at the extremes. Either it's going to be personal preference, regardless of vaccine status, or it's going to be mandatory masks. And maybe if you have a really controlled environment, as far as I know, the doctors and dentist office I've been to are not even forcing me to disclose vaccine status, but I could at least imagine in a controlled environment where you have a finite number of patients, and a finite, and clear medical needs. You can imagine implementing a policy in that context, but in a general context, like a school or a store, you really have to go to everybody wears masks, or it's an honor system, which we know is going to be less than perfect, and it's not a requirement. And I think that's deeply regrettable. If I were in charge of the CDC, I don't think I would. They've taken some real hits for putting that policy out there as, again, very good science, but very bad public policy. And now the schools are really on the front line on it. And, that's the conversation we're having, is they kind of punted on that. They said, well, it's good science, and we all know it's not really enforceable science. And so, could we take that road of enforcing the recommendation? Theoretically, yes, but that just gets so messy. That's, requiring everybody to volunteer their vaccine status. If they don't volunteer, treat them as if they're unvaccinated. But then that's just the starting point. It gets really slippery, because then, like Meredith said, now you're sharing HIPAA information about medical records with teachers, and teachers are sitting there having to have a list, right? If you're a primary teacher, you've got 15 kids, but if you're a high school teacher, you've got 100 kids, and you're having to have a list in your head about every kid. And then, you got a kid who, by and large, our kids have been great about complying with rules, but I think they're going to be a lot less great if it's a mixed rule instead of a black and white, everybody's treated the same rule. And now you got the teachers who have to memorize a list, and then they have to go out and, tell Johnny or Susie to put a mask on, and Johnny or Susie say, I don't want to. I have to. I personally could be convinced to go with just the recommended masks or the mandatory masks. And, honestly, what you see in that guideline is a bit of both. There are places where it's mandatory, and there's places where it's personal recommendation. I could see either of those. Much as I would love to, I just don't see the middle ground as a viable path. And I wish it was, because it was good science and it's what the CDC says, but the CDC was just really unrealistic. And they've thrown the administrators, the schools, store clerks, store managers completely under the bus with that policy. So I think we have to go one way or the other. And like I said, personally, I think a compromise is what, sometimes masks are required for everybody. Sometimes masks are on a recommended basis if you're not vaccinated. And we have a mix of both of those in multiple directions inside of the current policy. So it's exactly one of these pieces of legislation that's sausage and nobody likes it, but it is a compromise. That's the one thing I will say about it, is it is a compromise. Whether that's the right compromise is for us to continue to discuss, but it is a compromise. Anybody else on the board, or Meredith, you want to add anything?
I had something on another item, but Patrick, do you have something on masks? I see you're unmuted.
I just thought that maybe we should wait for the response to your inquiry to the legal team before we discuss this further, because in terms of like what we're allowed to do. So as employers, can we require employees to submit vaccination status? Or does it have to be voluntary? And then what's the difference between employees versus students? And, I'd be a lot less concerned with, requiring employees who are not vaccinated to wear a mask than some of the concerns around differentiating between students. I know that I also just, the only other thing is that, like, the only place besides medical facilities where you're really required to get vaccinations and where people are used to submitting vaccination information is schools, honestly. And yes, not yet for the COVID vaccine, but for everything else, like you got to get so many vaccines to send your kids to school. If anyone has solid grounds to say, yes, we need to know your vaccine status, like it seems like it would be us. But yeah, I think if the legal team says you can't require this, then we have to make one policy. And if the legal team says, yes, you can absolutely require this, you're on solid ground, then that's something different. But I'd want to know about like requiring people to submit status, and then also, you know, what we can require for employees. And not that I'm saying we should require employees to be vaccinated, but I'd be curious to know, is there a legal opinion on whether or not schools as public entities can require employees to be vaccinated? Because whether or not we choose to implement something like that, it's good to have the knowledge about what's possible, I think. And you know, if this all gets down to kind of like that parental concern. If you are in a classroom and you're a kid who can't be vaccinated and your teacher isn't vaccinated and they're not wearing a mask, to me, that's a really bad situation. And I don't think we should be allowing that situation to occur anywhere in our schools. And so I just don't know what our options are yet at this point legally.
I think we can explore that more. So, yeah, I mean, you know, again, on this theme of compromise and shades of gray, you know, maybe we'll have to check with lawyers and maybe we should talk to teachers, but imagine there's teachers on both sides of it. Maybe we treat staff differently from students. Maybe, you know, the 6th grade issues come up a couple times. By 7th grade, everybody can get vaccinated, but 6th grade, right? Maybe we treat 6th grade differently than 7th. You know, I would just encourage people to continue to kind of find the themes of compromise and tweaking of the policy rather than all one side or all the other side. Sorry, Meredith, I think you said you had something too.
Yeah, it was part of feedback that I think we all received. There was a suggestion to strengthen or be more specific in the language under the technology section to be reflective of what we had decided about how we would frame the use of Google Classroom and Seesaw in the fall. And I think it was a really good suggestion just to add some clarity to that. So I just wanted to suggest that I think that's a good idea to add that the suggestion was to add to number 6 technology at the very end section under the other considerations, social and academic supports, to say, in addition to what's there, all courses or grade levels will have a digital classroom preference that is updated at least weekly for K-5, daily for 6-12, and teachers and students are prepared to use that in the case of remote learning to go into effect for either, you know, short-term or long-term is what we talked about, to have that ready in an ongoing fashion. So I think that's a good idea to add that there.
I almost hesitate. I agree. I almost hesitate to do this, but I'll just point out one other thing because I know it's going to come up at some point, but sports. And right now, extracurriculars, whether they're sports or singing or something, are treated the same as school, which I think potentially sets us up to do something similar to what we did last year, which is, you know, outdoor sports, which is fall and spring, are unmasked. Indoor sports are according to the current policies, is obviously what we're debating, but indoor sports are unmasked when the virus is low and indoor sports are masked when the virus is high. So MPA still got to weigh in. We're going to have to look at MPA versus what we have, but there is, I think, a reasonable application of this to sports going forward too.
Thanks, Brian. I wasn't going to bring that up tonight at all.
Well, we'll get there sometime.
Can I hear more about how the focus was on orange for changes to the mask policy as opposed to yellow, and for just to those people who don't have it handy, you know, the color code is blue, yellow, orange, red, with blue being the lowest. To me, if it's moving upwards, it would seem like we would want to be careful. But I was curious, because I wasn't part of those conversations, why was it linked to orange, the mask?
And I say
Requirement.
for context, if I'm correct, we're in yellow right now, right?
As Patrick said, we're just over the line from blue, but yes, we're in yellow. And I think that's the answer, is the low end of yellow is still really low. The high end of yellow is starting to get there, but at that point, the high end of yellow, orange. Some scientists set up these boundaries, and yes, they're arbitrary, but orange felt qualitatively different from yellow, and red felt qualitatively different from orange.
Because that was the CDC that sets it, right?
Yes, these are CDC levels.
Yeah, so that's, okay.
But by county, right? CDC levels and then applied by county. And so, and that was really what I was going to say. Yellow just felt like we had just been in yellow when we set that, and now we're back in yellow again. Then we became blue, and now we're back in yellow. It just seems like the yellow was too low a threshold on the low side. So,
I mean, just for a reference point, we were in red from November through April, except for a brief period in February last year. I hope this coming year, hope the vaccines have an effect and we're not that bad off this year. But, red is not like some ridiculously high threshold.
Ryan, you had some really nice calculations last year where you had kind of taken the case rates and translated that to how many people you would expect to see in our schools. I don't know. Did you look at, if we were the upper end of yellow?
Can I ask again
how
about,
many people
well, not
that would
again.
be?
Oh my gosh, it happened again. I just emailed him, apologies. I'm getting feedback when I have the volume up. Patrick, I'm so sorry.
That's all right.
Don't worry, I've done that before too. It's hard in this context with dual meeting format. Go ahead, Patrick.
Yeah, my question was just, I remembered, Brian, that you had some nice calculations last spring where you were looking at okay, we're at this case rate per 100,000 or per 10,000, and that means we would expect to see 4 people in the school with COVID. Did you look at that with the current boundaries of yellow, orange, and blue? Because if it's when we're at the upper end of yellow, there might be 1 person in the whole school district who's sick statistically, and that seems reasonable to me. To keep it at orange as the border. But if it's there's maybe a dozen people at the upper end of yellow in the school district who would statistically be sick, then that seems too high. And that's just me personally. I was just wondering.
Yeah. I'd be happy to reproduce those calculations. I will give the caveat. One of the reasons I stopped doing them is they seemed overly aggressive because they're treating everybody the same, and kids clearly are getting infected at a different rate. So they, by the time the reds got really high, they were predicting dozens of kids in the schools that were sick, and we just weren't seeing that. So, but I'd still be happy to produce the table, understanding that it, has a very simplistic assumption, and that it was by the end, when we were kind of, at the low levels and we were starting to creep into 1, 2, 3 people, found it really helpful. But it was telling me there were 30 kids sick in the school and there were 0 or 1. I just, there's problems with the model too, but I'd be happy to produce them.
Yeah, the only thing about that statement, Brian, is that I really would hesitate to say things like, we only had 1 or 2 sick kids in the school, because what we should really be saying is we only had 1 or 2 known sick kids in the school. We may have had 30 sick kids in the school who weren't getting tested and didn't have symptoms that rose to the level of they had a fever, and didn't have symptoms that rose to the level of they were, sent home, but they were still infecting other kids. So that's you have to be really careful when you say we only had X number of people who were sick in the school. You can say we only had X number of people who we knew were sick in the school. Because, what we're seeing with what they first saw with the Beta variant and what we're now seeing with the Delta variant is that kids are very contagious, but they're not necessarily particularly symptomatic. And so because we don't have universal testing, we don't really know that effect. And that's why I think the statistical models are incredibly useful as a way of kind of gauging, okay, what are we looking at? And there's much, much less of a difference between infectiousness and the rate at which kids are getting sick now compared to the wild type variant, the wild type virus that was here a year ago January. So I think that's something we have to just keep in mind.
Well, I'd be happy to produce them.
Thank
So-
you so much. Yeah, thank you, Brian.
Anything else? This is going to come back in 3 weeks. My goal, I think, was for listening to the community and listening to each other, and Meredith and I to take back to the committee. And I think we have a couple of other committee members on here. If we're needing to make drastic revisions or not. And so this is not the final word, but anybody else got a burning desire to speak? We do have several more agenda items.
Was there
Okay.
any mention of doing anything differently should there be an outbreak at one of the schools? So I see that, everything's linked to community transmission, which, right, makes sense to me. We don't expect this to happen, and maybe that's why, but, right, what if there are 10 kids at the middle school who've tested positive, whether it's through the pool testing, if we decide to move forward with that or not. I was just wondering if this came up at all, and if there's any, I'm thinking especially if at this point, we're looking at the middle and the high school as not being masked, because I can't see how kids are going to feel very comfortable being masked if they're not vaccinated or what have you. So I think the reality is mostly kids are not going to be masked at the middle school and the high school. And so I would like to know what what's the final cutoff for if
Right.
there is an outbreak?
Well, so I mean, right now, the within school outbreak mostly comes under, I think it's number 7, which is we're still doing contact tracing and quarantining. And as long as vaccination rates remain low on those, a couple times those did shut down schools. So that's still operative. You could suggest that, I don't know, we could put thresholds for, there's no scientific guidance, so I think we'd be coming up with it on our own. But we could say if there's 10 kids in a school, we're calling that school orange, or if there's 10 kids in a school, we're calling that school red. That's where it gets a little hard, is there's not a lot of objective opinion on that, but we could put those kinds of guidelines into things too. Anything else on COVID? All right, why don't we go ahead and move on? It was a good, constructive conversation. I really appreciate that. Next up, we have a hiring recommendation. So Meredith is going to make a nomination. The board is going to slip into executive session after that, and we'll disappear for about probably 5 to 10 minutes. That's completely normal. And then we'll come back to the meeting, and people will be able to stay in the meeting for the whole time, and we'll be back shortly. Just want to give we have a number of new people here, so I just want to give them that overview. Meredith, you want to go ahead with your nomination?
Sure. We bring forward a recommendation to hire Rochelle Baume for the OHS Social Studies teacher.
And I will start with a motion, then we'll do executive session. So I would make a motion to authorize the hiring of Rochelle Baume for OHS Social Studies teacher. Is there a second?
I second.
Okay, I would now make a motion to go into executive session under 1 MRSA 4056A, discussion of confidential personnel matters. Is there a second?
I second.
Okay, any discussion on the executive session? We'll go ahead and vote. Beth?
But just quickly, are we doing that? Do we have a link for that?
Your RSU email should have a link for Meredith.
Okay, thanks.
So we'll be leaving and everybody else will be staying here in the Zoom meeting. Yep. We ready to vote?
Yep.
Okay, Beth? So we're voting to go into executive session. Yeah, she voted yes. We could hear it in the room. Jake?
Aye.
Patrick?
Aye.
Mark?
Aye.
I also vote aye. So Meredith, I guess you got to co-host somebody.
Yeah,
or
I
host
sent the
somebody.
link to all the board members plus Sam and Meredith D. Is there someone on staff who I can shift over the host duties to so we don't lose the meeting when I leave?
I see Shauna there. I don't know if
Yeah.
she's volunteering, or Kristen.
What's the subject in that email that you sent it to? I'm just looking
It
for it right
was a
now.
meeting invite, so it was just a. like
Patrick,
Oh, I see it. Yeah,
had
it
to
just
refresh.
came
Kristen,
through.
Can
It
I
just
make
came
you
through,
host,
thanks.
Kristen? Okay, thanks.
Oh, I was gonna say good because I'm on my
Oh,
iPhone.
sorry, Shauna.
But
Sorry.
that's all
Thank
right. You're welcome.
What's that? Yes.
Meredith, do I have to do anything?
Nope, you just have to stay put.
Will I have to let you guys back in?
Yes, you'll have to let us back in the meeting, I think.
Okay.
And then reassign host.
Yeah. So we'll be back.